What is the number one technical skill that FP&A professionals should master?
Modeling. Because it's going to be wrong. They're always wrong. But if you're a good modeler, your modeler will teach you why you miss and what happens automatically.
In 2023, 1/3 of CFOs that left a Fortune 500 company left to become a CEO.
If you're doing finance the way that I think is right, which is understanding what drives the business, you're still focusing on those drivers and trying to improve. That's what makes these CFOs so good, and it makes them able to become a CEO of other companies, is because find ways to automate or simplify or streamline what you're doing. So then you have free time to go and...
I know you pride yourself on being able to manage tough conversations and really making sure transparency is front and center, even if it's a difficult conversation. How do you go about doing that?
It's hard. I'm not going to mince words. It's not easy. And there's things you can do to make it easy. Learn what real communication is. We mistakenly believe that communication is what we're saying to somebody. In reality, communication is...
FP&A guy here. Have you ever wanted to level up your FP&A skills? Then check out the FP&A Guy's Ultimate Course Bundle at the FP&AGuy.com. That's the FP&A Guy.com. And use code podcast to save 25%. Get started learning today. Welcome to FP&A Tomorrow, where we delve into the world of financial planning and analysis, examining its current state and future prospects. I am your host, Paul Barnhurst, aka the FP&A Guy, and we will be guiding you through the evolving landscape of FP&A. Each week, we are joined by thought leaders, industry experts, and practitioners who share their insights and experiences, helping us navigate today's complexities and tomorrow's uncertainties. This week, I'm thrilled to welcome Zach Rial to the show. Zach, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Glad to be here.
All right, so a little bit about Zach before we jump into our first question. He comes to us from the Salt Lake City, Utah area. That's where I've got to know him, and I've met him several times. We both live in the area. He is a senior director of finance and strategy at Peak, which is a travel company. And then he has a bachelor's in finance from Utah State and an MBA from the University of Utah. So here's where we're going to start. First question I want to ask you, what does great FP&A look like to you?
I feel like a loaded question, but to put it simply, great FP&A is great partnerships. It's understanding the business, understanding what drives the different departments and functional areas of the business, and being a great partner to them to make all of those things, whatever they might be, better in some way, shape, or form.
I really like that. So great FP&A is really all about great partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We'll probably come back to that a little bit more later. But the next question I want to ask is tell us about yourself and your background. Let the audience know who Zach is.
Yeah, so we'll start with the fun stuff. So Zach is somebody who likes to read. There's a bunch of books behind me. I've read probably about all of them. That's a lie. I haven't read all of them. And my list of ones I haven't read are growing. My wife makes fun of me for it. But I love reading. I think just learning is fun, and reading is one of the best ways to learn. On the kind of opposite end of that, I've also loved physical activity. And so I played rugby in college and ran track. Some things that I really loved and enjoyed. I love being outdoors and just going and doing things. So I ski and I snowboard. I pretend to golf, and most of them just out there to be outside and hang out with friends and have a good time. So that's the fun stuff. On the work stuff, I consider myself, and I used to say an unusual finance person, but it's becoming much less unusual nowadays as finance has evolved. But I consider myself an unusual finance person because I really don't approach finance from a numbers and variance and dollars and cents method, but I really approach it from an operations perspective and what does this mean perspective. And I think that really got started with my first job. I did an internship and they liked me and they offered to bring me on as a financial analyst. And then a week into being a financial analyst, they said, hey, we actually need somebody to be an operations analyst and run shop floor scheduling. And I was like, I could do that, not a problem. I had no idea what that meant and no idea what I was getting myself into. But I went out and I did it, and I beat my head against the wall for many, many hours and weeks and days until I figured out how to be ops management, and how to run a shop floor and schedule when things were going to be done and meet sales' crazy demands and motivate and inspire operations to get things done faster and better. But I'm really glad I did it, because when I went back to finance, I had this mindset of like, well, how does this make us able to fulfill orders or fulfill what we're doing to our customers and drive more revenue? Like, how is this going to change that? And what does this tell us about that? And that's really how I approached everything I do in finances is what is this teaching us and what is this telling us about our business?
I've said multiple times, I think every finance professional would benefit from having some kind of operational, whether it's even just working on a big operational project or directly having that role. I worked a couple of years in the business. It was more as a business analyst, did a lot of report writing. I also supported some groups, did a little bit of cash forecasting and different things. But being in the more of that business role was very helpful when I moved into FP&A. So I'm with you. There's some huge benefit of really thinking from an operational standpoint. And I know in this episode, one of the things we want to talk about, we talked about is kind of structuring this to talk a lot about the finance athlete, which I think we'll get into some operations with that. But before we get there, I'm going to give you an opportunity to tell anything you want, experience, something about me that most people on social media wouldn't know since we've known each other for a couple of years. Anything you want to share?
I racked my brain on this one, trying to spend time to think of something that was like so interesting and awesome that people would remember. And I feel like, Paul, you're a pretty open book. People know a lot of things about you. You don't really hide up a lot. But I did just learn that Paul hasn't had soda, like carbonated soda, in 29 years, Paul?
29 years.
29 years. And I started at the beginning of this, but this message is brought to you by FP&A is I think pretty exclusively powered by caffeine. And so, Paul, kudos, hats off to you. 29 years without soda. That's impressive.
I'm sure I could come up with a few things others don't know about me, but we'll keep that. That's a good one to go with. I will say I met Jimmy Carter once, so there's one.
There you go. That was the treat.
It was pretty cool. I met him over in London. It was neat. All right, so back to you, since that's the interview. Early in your career, you briefly ran a window washing business that you owned. What did you learn from that experience? How'd that come about? You generally don't see window washing and then finance together.
Yeah, great question. So I came about because I changed my major to finance. I bounced around for a while, and I changed my major to finance. And I did that before my junior year, so between sophomore and junior year. And I did it like right before summer, and I recognized everybody else had internships, and I had no internships, and that wasn't going to fly when I tried to go look for internships next year. And I needed something to put on a resume that was more impressive, that could attract attention. So I started trying to figure that out, and I also needed money because I had none, and I needed to pay for school. And a buddy of mine came and said, "Look, we can get filthy rich cleaning windows. It'll be so easy. Here's the model. Here's the math. It's just we'll come home loaded." And I was like, "Yeah, that's what I want to do." Spoiler alert: we did not get filthy rich. We did get filthy. We did not get filthy rich. We did make good money though. It was a good experience. What did I learn? So I learned that I don't want to be a salesperson. So I was supposed to be out selling and getting people to let us clean their windows. And after about 2 weeks of that, I said, "Hey, can I run one of the crews clean the windows? Because I don't want to sell anymore. I don't like trying to convince people that they need something. I'm the kind of person that's like, hey, you have a need? I can address that need. Great, we'll do business. I don't want to try to convince you that you have a need." And so I switched to the ops side of things, and I helped run the window washing crews that would follow the salespeople around and do all the cleaning. And then I ran payroll and made sure everybody got paid. I learned that everybody has an opinion on how they should get paid, and that it was good to take that into account and let people's voices be heard, but ultimately we had to make a decision that was best for us, and what we did. I had my first exposure to scientific management, and we actually, without even realizing it, and so we did a piece rate where people got paid a portion of the jobs completed, and then later I learned that there was actual philosophy and management method behind that, which was kind of cool. But really, most of all, I just learned to keep myself busy and work hard to get things done and to make it happen when it didn't seem like you had the answer right in front of you. Just go out and tackle it, make it work.
Yeah, there's something to be said for just learning how to make things work, because I am going to guess what you were sold and the experiences you mentioned were quite different.
Big. It was
That was
not as
pretty
nearly as easy to
clear the way
sell.
you explained that.
Yeah, yeah, not nearly as easy to sell as we thought it would be. A lot hotter. We did it in St. George, Utah. A lot hotter than we thought it would be, and yeah, definitely different experience.
Yeah, and so just learning how to adjust and roll with that and figure it out and make the best of it. That's a great lesson that we all need to learn, because life never goes as we plan it. Let's be honest. It rarely ever does.
Yeah, yeah. I always tell people, men make plans and God laughs, and so here we are.
Yes, I've heard that quote as well. So before we jumped on this to record this episode, you and I talked about the term a finance athlete. And I know that's something you're a big proponent of, and you wanted to talk a little bit about that on the show. So I'd love for you to explain to our audience, what is a finance athlete? What does that mean to you?
Absolutely. Great question, Paul. And I think so. Let's first talk about what like an athlete is somebody who is prepping to go into college sports. Usually you see it in football, right? And they are just good at sports, right? Specifically, they're good at football. And then they don't have any really one set position that's their position. They're not a cornerback, safety, or linebacker. They're just an athlete, and they can fill whatever role is needed for the team. And so that's where this comes from, right? So applying that to business, a finance person who's a finance athlete is somebody who isn't, oh, I do AP, I do AR, I do XYZ, right? There's somebody who says, I do finance. And that means many different things. And that means, how do I help the business? How do I make sure that we're doing the things that are most important? Whether that's traditional FP&A, whether that's strategic finance, whether that's the accounting, whether it's, you name it.
Yeah, they do what's needed, a little bit of everything. And I love the sports example, and I'll give a couple examples. Some people will recognize it, some not. But I think some of the greatest examples I think of those athletes, Deion Sanders, right, or Bo Jackson, playing two professional sports at the same time. You have to be an athlete to do that, the demand. I mean, Deion Sanders, I don't know if you remember as a kid, I remember it, playing in a playoff, our World Series baseball game, and then flying that evening to play in a football game.
I can't believe that. Like, I mean, if there's two sports to do, baseball and football are probably the right ones, but yeah, it's crazy.
And then there's two other examples I love. One is, if anyone knows who Danny Ainge is, he's the only person still in the U.S. to be a 3-sport All-American in high school: football, basketball, and baseball. Not just playing them, not just All-State. He was All-American. I mean, that's like the definition in sports of an athlete. And then the one other that comes to mind right now is for the Saints, Taysom Hill. He's returned punts. He's played on defense. He's played running back. He's played quarterback. He's played tight end, and he's played wide receiver.
Guy's done it all.
I mean, that's fixed it. And I think he's return kickoffs in there as well. And so it's like 6-7 different positions. You just don't see that. And especially professional sports. At that point, you're very developed. So I really like that term as athlete, because so often we think in our career, yes, I need to specialize. And sure, you may have a specialization, but that doesn't mean you can't be an athlete, at least the way I think of it. So I know you view yourself more as an athlete. But what do you see as the main differences between that specialist and athlete? If you were to think of, what's the biggest difference between the two?
I think the biggest difference between an athlete and a specialist, the specialist has, might get in trouble saying this, but they have a set way that they're going to approach things, and that they're going to try and tackle things. And I think,
please get in trouble. It makes for better radio, so to speak.
Controversy stirs the content, right? So specialists, they know how to do things. They know how to do it a certain way. It's the way that's what makes them good, right? An athlete is somebody who I think is willing to and much more able to say, like, I don't know the right way to do this or the best way to do this. And so one, I'm going to go in and I'm going to try to learn that from whatever SME subject matter experts I have there. And two, I'm just going to figure it out as we go along, right? And I see most people who I would define as an athlete in finance, they are very biased towards action, right? And so they're going to not go in there and say, I'm going to create the perfect plan, get everybody aligned on that plan, then I'm going to execute. You say, hey, I'm going to create a good enough plan, and while I'm creating the plan, we're going to execute, and we're going to learn as we go, right? And I think that's really, to me, one of the biggest differences.
So I'm curious, it leads me to a question. Do you think most CFOs are athletes, or do you think they've got to that level because they've been really good at what they've specialized in and they've kind of switched to enough different areas that they have enough experience to get that role? What's your thought?
I think that's changing. I think if you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have said they're probably much more specialists, and they've gotten to where they're at because they're specialists. If you ask me now and what I see the next couple of years looking like, I think that they're much more of athletes, and they've filled many roles, and they've made it work. I think you're seeing more CFOs that are COOs as well, right? And they're filling both the role of chief operating officer and chief financial officer.
Yep.
I think the inverse is true too. You see a lot of COOs who are filling CFO roles as well. And so it's the line between operations and finance, especially in smaller companies and startups, but just really overall, is becoming very blurred. And finance is now being relied on much more to be strategy. And you're seeing less chief strategy officers, and that role is being really taken over by.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. You're seeing some of the BI, the strategy. Finance is much more commercial, and I agree with you. I saw a report just this last week that said in 2023, 1/3 of CFOs that left a Fortune 500 company left to become a CEO. You have to be an athlete as a CEO as a general rule, unless certain industries, specialist all the way.
Sure.
Can get by. But I think if you're one of those that's switching between different companies in general business, you got to be a pretty good athlete to be a CEO in my mind. What's your thoughts on it?
I agree with that. So it's funny, so one of the ways Paul and I got to know each other was by creating a networking group in the Utah area. And one of the first discussions we had was, as a group, was how do we get into SaaS? Help us find other finance people who aren't in SaaS get into SaaS. And I was really confused by that, because I was like, why is it so hard? What's different? Like, SaaS is just a different set of financial analysis you're doing, but at its core, it's just finance, right? And so that's what I think that's leading to your question, is like, finance is finance, right? If you're doing finance the way that I think is right, which is understanding what drives the business and understanding the impact that you can have and the operations things there, it doesn't matter if you're doing it at a software company. It doesn't matter if you're doing it at a consumer goods company. It doesn't matter where you're doing it at. You're still focusing on those drivers and trying to improve them, right? And I think at its core, that's what makes these CFOs so good, and it makes them able to become a CEO of other companies, is because they've learned to shut down the noise and stop hearing, hey, this is different, this is unique, this is so special, and say, okay, that's great, but I need to focus on what's going to drive the business and what's going to move us forward. And that's really becomes what a CEO's most important job is. What's going to drive the business forward? What's going to take us to the next level? And what's our strategy? How are we going to do that, right?
FP&A guy here. Today, I want to talk about the FP&A guy's ultimate FP&A course bundle. This bundle includes over 10 hours of content recorded by Ron Montero and myself, many templates, and great lessons to make you a better FP&A professional. The content includes FP&A business partnering, how to manage tough conversations, build world-class relationships, and hold the business accountable. Includes modern Excel, which is a real game changer for the way you'll work in Excel. Excel tables, the gateway to modern Excel. Power Query, a game changer for transforming your manual processes and loading data. And then dynamic arrays. Next, we cover modeling design principles. In this course, we talk about the importance of designing models in a certain way and how important it is that you think about design. And last but not least, driving value through smart analysis. How you can conduct data analysis to be a better FP&A professional. Go ahead and sign up for this bundle at thefpnaguy.com. That's the FPNANDA guy.com. Use the code podcast to save 25%. Get started learning today. Two things you made me think of, both from recent interviews I did that'll be coming out. One, when you talked about, shutting out the noise and just focusing on the business, not worrying about all the differences. This was more about people, but Randy Brown commented, he goes, the number one thing I've learned in my career, and he'll be on financial modeling, that's helped me is people are 95% the same. Focus on the 95%. Businesses at the end of the day, in many ways, are the same. You sell something, you collect cash, you want to collect more cash than you expense, right? At its heart, it really is quite simple. You have different channels you sell through. yes, there's nuances and it can get really deep. And the better you understand them, the more it can help you. But we're not talking about rocket science or brain surgery here. We're talking about something that there's fundamental economics in it. And the second one I love is I was interviewing a guy who's been a CFO, who's been at Campbell's and Del Monte, and we're getting ready to do an interview with him. And he commented, as a CFO, my approach was always business first, function second. I'd love your thoughts on that saying, because that strikes me as you from what conversations we've had.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how you define function. I'm going to assume what he's talking about is who's responsible for that or who does it, right? And I definitely agree with that mindset. I had a recent mentor of mine just say to me, there's this saying, I think it was either Chinese or Japanese proverb, I don't remember which, but you can't hear the screams in the forest unless you listen to the whispers, which sounds very ominous. I think it translates a little weird. But the point it's making is you need to listen to the whispers, what's happening right here around you to understand what the big noise is and why that's happening, why that's occurring. And so I think I spend a lot of time in my role trying to problem solve the things that are happening that are small, that are right in front of us, because it tells me something about what's happening in the business. It tells me something about the rumblings and grumblings that help me understand the big picture of what we're doing, right? And so is that my job always? No, I should probably dedicate a little bit more time to the MBR that's coming up and making sure that presentation looks really good and all the analysis is correct, right? But I sit there and I say, well, I'm willing to give up a little bit of time on that MBR because I hear this whisper, and I think that whisper is worth investigating, diving deeper into, and it might teach me something that could be good and beneficial to talk to the executive team about, right? And so I chase it down.
I like that. I like that quote. I appreciate you sharing that. Getting back to kind of the athlete or the specialist, I'm curious, do you think it's different skills required to be an athlete versus a specialist, or is it mostly different mindset? Or how should people think about it? I mean, I'm early in my career and I'm like, I really want to become more of an athlete versus a specialist. How should someone think about that?
Yeah, so I think there's ways that you can make it happen naturally, which are working in companies where there's not really room for a lot of specialists, right? And so typically smaller companies or small finance teams, right? I think the other thing is it's not it's not a skill set in that, like, oh, I need to learn and get this certificate. It's a skill set in, like, how do you think, right? And so this is how I apply it to my hiring is I look for people who are just intellectually curious. They want to know why something's happening or why it works this way or what made this happen, right? And I think that's what separates you out a little bit there is as an intellectually curious person, I want to know why we sell this way. That's it. That's like at the end of the day, I'm just interested in that. Like, and the added benefit is it's going to make me better, right? And it's going to make me more of an athlete. But really, at its core, I'm just interested in figuring out why we do it. And I'm just curious. I want to scratch that itch and learn.
Interesting you say that, because I would say has to be one or two when I ask people, what should people do to be better at FP&A, or what advice would you give to someone in their career? And something along the lines of learning the business and intellectual curiosity is always at the top. And often that number one is really being intellectually curious. So what's your thought on that? Is that something that just comes natural to some people? Is it something we develop? Like, say you're in a role and you're really not curious. Is that you're in the wrong role or you haven't developed that skill? I'm just curious your thoughts. I know there's not a right answer to this.
I think it depends, right? And I need to stop answering.
No, sorry, it depends isn't allowed on the show. I don't know if you do that.
Cut that out. You're in the wrong role. No, I think you have to put yourself in a situation where you can be, right? And it's funny. I talked to my team a lot about like we need to create opportunities for us to be bored, because when you're bored, you're naturally going to look for something to fill your time. You're naturally going to start looking at things most of the time. And so I think, there's a lot of things that we end up doing that don't give us that time to be bored. And it's hard to be curious when you don't have time to be curious. And so I think if you find yourself in a role where you can't be and you want to develop that skill, find ways to automate or simplify or streamline what you're doing. So then you have free time to go and be curious. And you'll find that you want to do that because you want to be productive. You want to contribute to the overall success of the business. And I don't think if you're not born naturally curious, you can't become naturally curious. I think you can become it. I think it's something that you have to want to do and make right.
I totally agree with you. I think most things, there's a heavy component of nurture that you can use. You can learn to do it if you're passionate enough, willing to put in the effort. I mean, obviously there's some exceptions. You're not going to be Michael Jordan or LeBron James if you're 5'5" and you have no athletic talent. Can you become a decent basketball player? Sure, but there's barriers.
Was what Isaiah Thomas was played for the Celtics, and what was he?
Correct. Well, Muggsy Bogues. There's guys who get there, but they also usually have blazing speed or something with it. You can overcome a lot, but I think there are some natural things that become harder, right? Not say you can't overcome them, but there are definitely some genetic things that make certain things harder than others. But I'm definitely on the nurture side. All right, now that we've covered science, nurture, nature, all that fun stuff, we'll get back to the show. Funny enough, I have this RevOps question I want to ask you because I know you've been involved in RevOps and just getting your thoughts on, hey, where does RevOps sit? How should finance be involved in RevOps? And I asked a guy that today that's an FP&A about RevOps in a small company where you could use finance. He goes, sure, they could help do it, but they'll do a crappy job. Like basically keep finance away from RevOps. But if you have to have someone fill the role for a little while, go for it. What's your take on this discussion? Because I've had CEOs tell me that finance should sit in RevOps. And then you have others, oh, no, that's a bad idea. So I know you've been involved in it. How do you think about it? And how does finance and RevOps kind of work together? Just some of your thoughts on those two functions.
Yeah. So quick answer here is I think you have to look at how your team is structured. If you have a CRO and they own RevOps and all they own is RevOps and sales, alarm bells. That's probably not what you want. But if that CRO is really a chief revenue officer and they're really heavily involved in owning things like marketing and customer success and sales, then I think that it's probably a really good idea to have RevOps under them, right? Because they're owning that go-to-market engine. And it's funny because we default to thinking of go-to-market as sales and marketing, but your success team is part of your go-to-market engine. It's just go-to-market for existing customers, right? But you're also selling the success team usually to your customers as well. So it's part of your go-to-market engine. And so, RevOps, in my mind, look at how you're structured and what's going on. Is finance going to do a terrible job at it? Maybe, if you have people who don't get the business and aren't intellectually curious and aren't willing to be an athlete, right? But I helped set up our RevOps team. We decided that we needed to have a dedicated RevOps team. And so we opened a position for director of RevOps, and I actually applied for it. I thought, hey, maybe this will be a fun pivot in my career. I'll try it out. And I ended up withdrawing my application. I think once I can find it, I want to see where I'm at. But we hired this guy who I just love partnering with, and he does a lot of things that I don't do very well, really, really well, and that are very important to RevOps, like making sure that we have proper process documentation, making sure that we've made everything really simple and easy to do inside our CRM, and that our CRM is clean and clear and easy to use. And he doesn't just make it work, he does it right? And he's really good at project management. He's implemented Asana and he's a wizard at it, and I suck at it, right? I'm just very terrible at it, right? But we partner really well together and we work really well together. And he reports to the COO. He doesn't report to the CFO. Could he report to the CFO and be just as effective? 100% he could. But at our business, it makes more sense to have him.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to business, to people you have. And I've heard a lot of different answers. One of them that probably made the most sense to me that I liked is Scott Stouffer, which said I think a lot of things similar to you. He's been a CEO 5 times, taking companies public. He now is a CEO of a go-to-market startup. And he goes, if you have a true chief revenue officer, like you said, not a VP of sales that's masquerading as a CRO, which I think a lot of small companies have because we have title inflation, let's be honest. And so what he said is if it's a true CRO, much more likely to put it there. And the second thing he goes, are they more focused on process and systems or analytics? If I want deep analytics out of my go-to-market, I'm going to have it under finance. If it's really more all about the systems and the processes, I'm going to stick it under my CRO. And that made a lot of sense to me. That resonated with me. And it seems that's similar to what you're saying here.
Yeah, yeah. My RevOps partner is really great at systems and process, and he sits into the COO, and I think that makes a ton of sense. And we rely on each other for the crossover there. And I've got some great members of my BizOps team that really help the analytics side of things to help fill that gap. So I think it works really well. I also think it depends on what your company is obsessed with. I'm going to start obsessed with growth. Well, where does growth come from? Growth comes from sales. And so naturally, as a finance person, I was being asked about growth in all of the meetings and discussions we were talking about when it came to MBRs, QBRs, and other things like that, right? And so I went and plugged myself into sales as much as I could so I could have answers to these things, which was how I naturally began to build out somewhat of a RevOps process before we built a full RevOps team and handed it off to them.
Makes a lot of sense. And, as you said, right, if you're focused on growth, obviously sales becomes so much more important. As we've all heard the saying, you can't cut your way to growth. It doesn't work. Companies have tried. They're usually not around anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's smart growth too, though, right? And so you can reprioritize and make decisions. I know there's a company here in Utah that I talked to, and they realized that they were growing at a great rate, but their burn wasn't changing, right? And they weren't having the kind of like churn metrics that they wanted to have, and so they realized they were focusing on too many verticals, and so they cut the other verticals and made them not a focus. And that's a consequence of the sales team. But now, looking at the numbers, they're doing phenomenal, and they've grown rapidly, and all their KPIs are very positive, and they're getting to the point where they're cash flow break even. So there's smart growth, and I don't think that's cutting your way to it. I think it's just making smarter decisions.
Correct. It's making the right strategic decisions. I heard someone say today, I asked him about managing burn, and he goes, we basically managed kind of budget things from a portfolio standpoint, and every dollar we added, we had to offset it. So we weren't growing if we weren't finding a way to do it within that framework of saying we're getting benefit for it. It's going to lead to, $1.20 or $1.30. I worked at a company once and got a new CEO. In one of the first meetings, he sat down and said, okay, here's how much we've grown over the last 3 years. We've grown, 3-4%, whatever it was last 3 years. Here's how much we've grown in expenses. It was like $1.07 compared to that $1.03. He's like, that can't continue. There will be changes.
Yeah. Math doesn't math.
Yeah. Over the long run, if the bottom line's higher than the top line in growth, it's not sustainable.
Yeah. I think especially in today's market, right? When investors are looking to put money into companies, the mindset of growth at all costs is definitely, I don't want to say gone, but it's different. And
yes.
It's not so much at all costs anymore. And so you just need to be aligned with what you're trying to accomplish as a business too, right? And what you're trying to do with your investors, and if you're going to need more investors, and all those type of questions you have to answer.
A lot has changed. Someone told me the other day, last year was the first year, I think it was a year or two ago, that we didn't have just continued growth in e-commerce. So now they're figuring out, how do I manage a business that isn't always growing? We don't have free money anymore. Yes, is it still relatively cheap compared to historical for those that have been around more than 40, 50 years that kind of experienced some of that? Sure. But for many people, they've never experienced even 6, 7, 8% interest rates. And so that's expensive.
Yeah, it certainly is. In my adult life, 7, 8% interest rate is incredibly high, and it scares me a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, also, buying more.
I'm a student of history, so I recognize that that's pretty good, actually, on the grand scheme.
Yeah, like if I talk to my parents bought the first house in the 70s before I was even born, early 70s, I think they paid a 21% interest rate.
Yeah, it was like 2018, somewhere in that range.
They paid $11,000 for the house.
That's a different story.
So the payments, I don't know, were like $200 a month or whatever. So, there are definitely some differences, but anyway. One more question I want to ask, and then we're going to jump into the rapid fire. So this is kind of a little change of subject. This is something I know about you. I know you pride yourself on being able to manage tough conversations and really making sure transparency is front and center, even if it's a difficult conversation. So how do you go about doing that? And maybe any advice you could offer to our audience, because I know that's something you're good at. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, there's it's hard. I'm not going to mince words. It's not easy, and there's things you can do to make it easier, and it really has to do with the security that you feel, right? And so the best way you can to get this and be able to do it is to have a really secure work environment with people that you can trust and can be this kind of blunt and forthright with. That's the best way, in my opinion, right? And so whether that's who you report into or your stakeholders or your team individually, right? Building that environment where there's that trust that you can be that person, right? And say those things. I think the other way you can get it is by being right. It sounds a little egotistical, but like when you prove that you're correct, when you have consistently shown that what you're doing is correct and right, that's mostly mistake proof, you earn credibility, and that credibility allows you to say hard things sometimes because they know that it's credible, and you're not just griping and moaning and groaning and complaining, but you're probably right? And so that's where I think the beauty of the traditional finance mindset does help out, and it was beaten to my head by a mentor of mine who went up through finance when you had to have a stint as a controller, you had to be perfect, you had to do all those things, right? And he beat into my head, tie out all your files, tie everything out, foot it all, make sure it all works, and it's all completely keep counted for. And so that's one of the first things I do when I take over some process is like, is this right? Right? Because I have credibility I need to maintain or build, and I need to make sure that I have that so I can say hard things. Because if I can't say hard things, I can't really be effective.
Looking to level up your career and build skills that make you stand out to FP&A hiring managers? How about earning a certificate from a world-renowned business school? Wharton Online and Wall Street Prep have partnered to create an 8-week online financial planning and analysis certificate program. You'll learn the art of forecasting, analysis, business partnering, and financial storytelling from Wharton Online's world-class faculty, coupled with first-hand exposure to technical and interpersonal skills with real-world applications as practiced in top corporations. Space is limited, so level up your career today and use the discount code TheFPAGuy300 to receive $300 off tuition. That is the FPA Guy 300 to receive $300 off tuition. Learn more by going to wallstreetprep.wharton.upenn.edu. I love the two things you said there. Trust, right? If you have a healthy culture with trust, it's easier to speak your mind. And two, being able to bring facts to the discussion and having done your homework to support those facts so that you can, basically like, look, this is what the data says. And in this case, there's really not much argument to it. Sometimes there may be, and then you bring in the different points. But I really like that because I've heard someone say dispassionate, hard-headed analysis. And what they mean by that is not being a jerk. It's removing emotion and let the facts speak for themselves. And there's something to be said for that during a difficult conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've ended many conversations with sales about quotas, about the things that, finance and sales fight about by saying, I hear you. I really do. I hear what you're saying, but that doesn't explain these numbers. And I need to be able to defend this decision, at least with numbers in some way, shape, or form. And can you argue that this is correct or wrong? Tell me this isn't right, just so that I can agree with you. And they're like, I can't. I'm like, okay, so I can't agree with you, right? And then we start to figure that out.
Yeah, I remember we had a conversation one time with the sales head, and we were developing new commission plans, and they wanted to have no clawback if a customer canceled early. And we're like, here's the economics. Explain to us how this is going to work. Like, well, we'll sell over it. No.
You never have. Right? You never have.
Yeah, exactly.
It can change.
All right. So we're going to move into two sections. The first, there's some questions. First section, I call it kind of rapid fire in the idea that give quick answers on this. 4 of them around FP&A, 4 or 5. And then we're going to do get to know you, and we'll wrap it up here. So just a few more minutes. So what I'm going to start with, what is the number one technical skill that FP&A professionals should master?
Modeling.
Okay.
You gotta be a good modeler because, and what I say is not that you have to have the most complex model and has all the coolest formulas. Your model has to be useful, right? It has to teach about business. And that's what I mean by modeling, right? Like, because it's going to be wrong. They're always wrong. But if you're a good modeler, your modeler will teach you why you missed and what happened automatically.
Well, I'll sum it up as George Box once said, all models are wrong, some are useful. Make sure yours is useful.
That's a mantra I live by. I say that to my team at least once a week.
Love it. What's the number one soft skill?
Communication. No, I'm not going to do that one. Persuasion. I think you need to be able to persuade people and get them to believe you and hear the message that you're truly trying to send.
All right. So we got persuasion and modeling. All right. Next one. If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about FP&A, what would it be? What would you change?
Oh, gosh. I would change the need to do variance analysis on everything. We should do variance analysis not only through the most important things, everything else, just let it go.
Put a materiality threshold on there and move on.
Yeah, exactly. Let's apply the audit mindset here. Is it in my materiality threshold? Yes, no, great, move on.
I like it. I've seen a little bit of that done, and definitely there's times we could use more. Are you currently using generative AI?
No, not really. I mean, I use it, like, I know people get asked this question. They're like, well, do you ask it a question about blah, blah, blah? So I will use it as a sounding board, or I'll use it to say like, hey, where's a good place to get this information? But I'm not using it in any of my, what I'll call hard finance skills.
Fair enough.
I want to. Haven't figured out how to use it best yet.
I think a lot of people are trying to figure out the direct use cases. Sounding board is great, email, a lot of those things. Others are still trying to figure out. We talked to a guy today that he was teaching, and within 30 minutes after his course, he has people up and using Profits machine learning with their data, using AI and Python. And so it's there. And that just made me go, all right, I need to learn more. Because I think there's a lot of use cases, but it's trying to figure out how. We're all so busy. It's a commitment.
Well, and you got to convince, your IT compliance team. It's okay for me to give it this information. So, it'll be safe. Don't worry.
Yeah, you have to figure out. Yeah. And that's why he's teaching, hey, you use the AI to write the Python, then you do the Python script and give it your data. Right. It's a little different approach, but I know what you mean. There's definitely don't, as I always like to say, don't give any public open AI your company's data. Just don't do it. You wouldn't put it on Google. Don't give it to the AI. All right. So we're going to move on to the get to know you section. What's your favorite hobby? You mentioned sports before. Is there one in particular? If you had one hobby or
well, so favorite sport is a lot of people don't know this. The United States has a Major League Rugby, MLR. This is my shameless plug. Find your local team, go out and support them. I want to see it grow. I love rugby. So Salt Lake has a local team. I go watch them. I'm a season ticket holder. It's a ton of fun. I've gotten a lot of my friends into it. My brother comes with me. It's a great time. I'd say my other one would be reading. I usually use that to de-stress. I've been doing a lot of reading. A gift that we got family this year was a hot tub. I love hot tubs, so I go out in the hot tub after a long, hard day at work, sit in that, and read a book. That's great.
Come into your house to play Catan and sit in the hot tub.
Let's get a floating table. I'm in, Paul.
And then we'll go to a rugby game.
So, listen, you just described the perfect thing.
All right, we'll figure it out sometime. I'm in. All right. What's the one book you're going to recommend to our audience if you had to pick one?
I will say I think that the one that I have enjoyed the most, especially relating to business, is called The 5 Dysfunctions of Teams. Check out the name right. I actually don't have a book anymore. I loaned it out to somebody. 5 Dysfunctions. It's a parable. Talks about the 5 things that teams typically are dysfunctional on and how to fix them. And I have found that it is almost a script written about most interactions I have with dysfunctional teams.
I like it. All righty. So the five dysfunctions of teams. All right. Favorite travel destination? You can go anywhere in the world tomorrow. Where are you going?
Iceland. I went to Iceland as a graduation present to my wife and I. We graduated at the same time. We loved every minute of it. And I would go back in a heartbeat. Got
it. Love it. If you could have dinner with one person in the world, who are you taking? I mean, other than me, of course.
Well, I've had dinner with you, Paul. Well, just lunch. And it was good. It was all right. If I had one shot to call, I don't know if I would call you back in. Sorry. I would really like to, more of a recent thing, I'd really like to have dinner with Barack Obama, actually. My parents, if they're listening, apologize for the slander I'm about to throw at you, but my parents are pretty conservative. And so I grew up when Barack Obama was running for office and under the mindset that he was the worst person ever. And I have since grown to appreciate all the things he's done. And I would just love to sit and pick his brain and talk to him for a while. I think he was one of our not to get too political, but one of our last great presidents.
All right. Well, if you make that connection, ask him to come on the show. We can talk government budget. That could be an interesting FP&A discussion.
Oh, goodness gracious. I don't want to go anywhere near that.
Yes, but I got to go to authority in that case. All right. So if you could give one piece of advice to our audience, either something to start doing or to learn to be a better business partner today, what should they do?
I would say learn what real communication is. And this is a talk I gave to a lot of people when I first started managing them, is we mistakenly believe that communication is what we're saying to somebody. In reality, communication is what they're hearing. And so you got to learn, when you learn that lesson and truly embody it, then you can start to really change how you communicate and talk to people, because you're now focusing on how do I ensure that they're hearing what I want them to hear. And I think the best way to do that is to play dumb and ask a lot of questions. And by asking a lot of questions, you get a lot of information. And then by having that information, you become a better communicator, more effective at what you do.
You had someone say the number one skill is learning to ask questions for FP&A professionals. So there you go. Ask lots of questions. Play dumb.
Yeah,
I'm naturally dumb, so it comes easy for me.
Yeah,
but last thing, if someone wants to learn more about you and get in touch, how should they do it?
I'm happy to connect on LinkedIn. Send me a message there. You can reach out to me directly via my email. It's zrial1992@gmail.com. So first initial, last name, 1992. I'd be happy to chat with you. I love talking to people. I'm a pretty social person. So.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Zach. Enjoyed chatting and looking forward to the audience getting to listen to this.
Hey, it's a pleasure, Paul. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here. I think you're doing great things for the community, and I love tuning in and hear what I can hear when I've got some free time and see what you work on.
All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to FP&A Tomorrow. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and a review on your podcast platform of choice. This allows us to continue to bring you great guests from around the globe. As a reminder, you can earn CPE credit by going to earmarkcpe.com, downloading the app, taking a short quiz, and getting your CPE certificate. To earn continuing education credits for the FPAC certification, take the quiz on Earmark and contact me, the show host, for further details.